Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar series today. I am Janicia Hoyle, the coordinator for the Next Generation Global Health Security Agenda Network. And we're joined today by Dr. Frank Smith, the campaign director for No More Epidemics. So we'll be talking today about the role of campaigning and advancing the global health security agenda. Just a couple of general rules. We'll take questions at the end of the webinar presentation. So if you do have any questions, we ask that you enter them in the chat box, and then I will relay those to Frank at the end of his presentation. If you're joining us by social media, we ask that you use the hashtag #AdvocateGHSA. So now I'll turn it over to Frank. So Frank, if you have any words you'd like to say, and then I'll load your slides for you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to go through a presentation that has three different components. I'm going to focus mainly on the part of advocacy and campaigning. I'm going to assume a certain knowledge of the global health security agenda. For those who want more information, we'd be more than happy to sort of answer any questions on that at the end of the seminar. But I'm keen to sort of look at and explore what role advocacy and campaigning, first of all, what it is, what role it can play in advancing this particular effort. Then I want to situate the historical context of the effort, of the issue, and then maybe present a little bit about the No More Epidemics campaign and how we're approaching this. I think that's, and if there's any questions, please feel free to ask them at the end. Okay, so I want to start by defining what we mean by campaigning, and I'm going to use the term campaigning and advocacy interchangeably. I think it's people use the word in different ways, maybe across the Atlantic. We tend to use campaigning more than advocacy in the UK, but the words I'm going to use interchangeably. If we go to the next slide, oh. So a quick definition. Campaigning is, as I understand it, and as many practitioners understand it, is a process of managing information and knowledge strategically to change or influence policies and practices, or attitudes and beliefs that affect the lives of people, particularly the disadvantaged. In this case, is to affect the lives of people potentially or all of us potentially affected by infectious disease of epidemic potential. Now, the emphasis here isn't on the activities, it's very much on the process itself, and the way the process is sort of analyzed, structured, and prepared for, that allows the activities to mean something and to make sense in the context of advocacy. Our purpose is to influence. Now, I looked up influence in the dictionary before coming to see exactly what it means, and it's the act or the power of producing an effect without apparent exertion of force or direct exercise of command. And I think that's critical, because in many instances, the most effective influencers are the ones you never know have influenced you. Subliminal marketing, we've all heard of that. We all know what it means, but what does it mean for advocacy as we're trying to shape policy priorities and funding priorities? We always assume that, you know, good advocacy means trotting up to the hill, talking to the nice congressman and walking down again. But that's one particular way of influencing. The effective advocate will only go up to the hill when the right conditions are in place for that that target, if you like, to say yes and to receive the message in a positive way. Now, a little bit about the process. This process of advocacy and campaigning involves technical expertise in campaigning and communications. It's not just you need to sort of understand the how to do it, the art, the craft of campaigning and communications. it doesn't mean that, you know, not everybody can learn it, but it's not just like saying something and then waiting around for a change to happen. Thematic expertise is also necessary. You need an evidence base. Because that the credibility of your intervention is based on that. But evidence alone, and we'll see that, we'll look at that in a little later, isn't sufficient. If it was, the world, we wouldn't have any problems in this world, because, you know, we've got all the evidence necessary on climate change, global health, epidemics, chronic diseases, and everything else. But clearly those messages aren't getting through. So there's another element, an aspect of decision making that's tied to less factual dimension that needs addressing, and maybe the US context is very aware of that in the current situation. So the process of bringing the three areas of technical expertise, thematic expertise, and political expertise. Many campaigns have failed, not through preparation or facts, but because they've turned up at the doors of politicians 1 week after the budget processes have closed, or, you know, 3 months beforehand, where it's not relevant, that conversation is not relevant. So understanding the political cycle and the power processes and the power dynamics, the relationship between formal power relations and realpolitik behind the scenes is critical. And that's where lobbyists come in, and people that actually know the targets are very important. Sorry. I want to sort of set out a little bit of theory that's kind of influences the way we think and our approach, just to ground it a little bit. We sometimes talk about an understanding of the structure of political opportunity to advocate. It's no use advocating on something that nobody knows anything about, and the decision isn't right. The moment isn't right for a decision. I used to work at Amnesty International, and we tried to do a campaign on violence against the LGBT community in 2003, and we found very difficult, because we hadn't, the moment of political opportunity was not right in that country. Arguably it never was, but it wasn't right within the membership and within the global community at the time. If we went back now, we'd have probably much greater success. So we need to understand the structure of political opportunity and the room for influencing and moving an issue forward. We want to create historical blocks. And this is a term that comes from Gramscian political theory. I'm sorry if I'm going into some detail, but we want to create an alliance of forces that are politically organized around a set of ideas. Now, what that means is, think about how people sometimes say, this is an idea whose time has come. Well, every idea potentially can have its time. What is needed is a set of alliances that don't naturally fit together, to come together and to collectively agree that this idea is relevant to their particular issue and worth pursuing. Now, we've seen how AMR came to the fore recently over the last couple of years, taken on board by a number of organizations that didn't necessarily work on that as their core issue. It was pushed by a number of donors and big organizations, and also integrated into messages by other organizations. Maternal, newborn and child health emerged as an issue in around 2010-12, with a coalition of organizations that included some of the main international development organizations that took this on, and others that had campaigned on this for years. So creating a historical block, an alliance between different organizations that aren't the usual suspects is necessary. And you do that by creating chains of equivalence, linking your issue to the issue of others. How does the issue of GHSA and epidemics link to the Sustainable Development Goals agenda? link to the UHC agenda? How does it link to the issue of security? Here you have very different communities, the security community and the international development community on two sides, linked together in a chain of equivalence that can be articulated through the global health security agenda, and developing a narrative that's going to capture that, and then a space for everybody to be reflected in that is going to be critical. Influencing through different means, obviously lobbying, movement building, marketing, communication, and having the tools and the ability to do that is critical. And this is done through the interaction between the social groups and the political institutions, which is necessary. And then understanding the decision-making process, not only at the formal level and at the political level, but also at the personal level. And that's critical. And again, this is to do with how we privilege facts. So Kahneman has a very neat little model based on two systems. System one, which is fast, automatic, frequent, emotional, which is critical, stereotypical and subconscious. And the system two, which is slow, effortful, infrequent, logical, calculating. We tend to go, the scientific community, the medical community, the epidemics community, tend to go to decision makers and appeal to their systems too. We tend to go with facts. We tend to go with figures. We tend to go with predictive models. We seldom go to them and appeal to them on their system one decision-making processes. We don't go to them with emotional appeals other than millions will be killed, which is a fact-based thing. We don't go to them appealing to, the emotional, the stereotypical and subconscious drives. And this is where campaigns can come in and translate the messages that are coming out of the technical community for a popular and a political audience. The campaign cycle, I'm not going to go through that very fast, but we need to, I'm not going to go through that. I just wanted to put it up there to give you a sense of the process, and just to try and draw your attention to the fact that most campaigning is done, say 2/3 is done on the planning and the strategizing and the research. You need to know your targets. You need to know when to go to them. You need to get your facts right. You need to get your recommendations right. You need to know that those recommendations are realistic and achievable. You need a pathway from the problem to the solution, well articulated, and a powerful narrative that's going to drive that change. Only then can you move to the level of actions and go out and start the process of communicating and getting the message across. And then, there's feedback loops that are not really loops, but add the arrows down that highlights that process as an iterative process. It's not a science necessarily, it's a science and an art. You need to reflect back on what worked. There are no failures. There are just different doors to push on, and one will open. So knowing which doors are closed and which ones are open is very important, and this is where the iterative process is critical. Wanted to introduce you to the issue life cycle as well, and try and sort of encourage you to think of where GHSA is positioned within the kind of issue life cycle, because it will determine your strategy and the way you approach the particular your campaign strategy. So, and we can all recognize within this kind of cycle where different issues have figured and how they've moved forward. So issue one is a new demand, awareness, and we need to consider this not in relation to our own community, but in relation to the decision makers we're trying to influence and the constituents that they listen to and support them. That they are accountable for. So where is this on the political agenda and in public consciousness? Is it a new demand? Is the issue, is awareness really low? Is this an issue that is gaining support, where key decision makers start to emerge and decision-making institutions such as parliaments start to discuss this? Is the issue moving forwards? Are solutions, practical solutions being developed? Is it an issue 4 where workable plans are developed? And again, don't think about this from the perspective of your own community, but think about this in relation to the powerful voices that are in charge of the purse strings and in charge of policy. Is it an issue 5 where ideas are being implemented, monitored and evaluated, or is it an issue 6 where there's we can actually see the impact? And then we need to look at, in relation to that, how our tactical engagement. Now, with GHSA, and I won't read all of that, I'm happy to share it afterwards. With GHSA, if we're being realistic, different contexts and different countries are at different levels, but we're probably around issue 3, merging into 2 in some contexts and merging into 4, but probably in issue 3. And therefore, we have a long way to go in still making the case and building support so that we can sort of socialize the issue in a much more convincing and compelling way. And that means coming back to our sort of theoretical language, creating that historical block, ensuring that we're relevant to the Sustainable Development Goals, to the UHC, that our issue is taken forward and adopted by them, that we're not competing needlessly in the sector. Now, I wanted to put the problem tree up. And I'm rushing through this. I'm really sorry. I've got quite a bit to cover, because the way we articulate the problem from an advocacy campaign perspective is very different to the way we articulate it from a technical perspective. We look at the technical folk look at the problem in relation to our ability to impact on that problem and make a difference to the issue. The campaigners and the advocates look at the problem in relation to the accountable party, and then situate the problem in relation to that accountability or lack of, to move this forward. The problem with IHR is the fact that governments aren't supporting this and they're not complying with this. You could then look at from a technical perspective, it would look at the more detailed 11 packages and the kind of conditions of possibility for moving those forward technically. We're trying to create the conditions of possibility for technical people to do their work and get both the political support and the resourcing. So we work very effectively together. But the problem analysis is complementary, and with the sub causes of the problems for the technical people are probably the effects of the problems for the advocates. But so I just wanted to put that out there. Then I wanted to show you a quick model of targeting when we look at campaigning. We tend to think that the decision that the politician or certain politicians, hold all the power, but we need to understand the decision-making process within different departments, within different political situations, institutions, within different countries. And many of us have an instinct for that, and that's probably right. MSH has lots of field programs and I dare say other partners in the campaign, Save the Children, International Medical Corps, and Afinet, who know the different players on the ground and know who makes the decisions and who approves them. Politicians are always tend to be the decision approvers, except, funnily enough, in relation to health. In relation to health, is probably the only politician that's probably a doctor, is the Minister of Health, which is odd because ministers of finance don't tend to be kind of economists, and ministers of internal planning or don't tend. But when it comes to health, we feel that or the political apparatus feels that the technical expert needs to own that rather than the politician. And that sometimes explains why ministries of health are very low on the pecking order when it comes to resources, because they're not career politicians and trained politicians, they're doctors and technical experts. and veer on that side. So they're less linked into the dynamics of power within a given context. So we need to understand the decision makers, the stakeholders, the decision advisors, and then we should never go to the decision maker first of all. We should prime the terrain. We should create the right conditions for that meeting. We should start by the different stakeholders and the decision advisors and work up, so that when we do approach the decision maker, we and then go through the decision approver to ensure protocol. But when we do make that approach, the ground is fertile for the right response that we're looking for. I'm rushing through this a bit, and I do apologize. I will come back to anything afterwards. Influencing options, I just wanted to put that up there so that you can see how we kind of craft a narrative based on who we want to influence. Do we want to influence the audience and it's based on, do they agree with us but don't consider this issue important in terms of the stakeholder or the audience, or is the audience very important and doesn't agree with us? In that case, depending on where the audience is at, we need to develop a specific narrative and a specific influencing strategy. Now, one of the pitfalls of campaigning and advocacy is to develop a narrative or to develop an argument that is based on what I think you should know, rather than trying to understand how much do you know, care, and how much are you willing to do about this issue? What are your main concerns outside of this? And how can I pitch this to you in a way that's going to help you achieve your objectives, help you care more about it, and help you see the relevance to it and take that forward? So you need to develop a narrative that's based on where your audience is at, not where you think they should be. And that, I think, is central to the campaign, the art of campaigning and advocacy. And that depends. So we can develop an influencing strategy that's based on persuading our audience to agree with our position. This is important with influential neutrals, people that don't see the relevance of it. Or we can persuade them that the issue is important, and this is with disinterested allies. And what you find in civil society organizations working on different issues, the first thing you need to do, the first thing for us as a community working on GHSA to do, is to persuade our allies within the international development community and within the humanitarian community that this is a critical issue that they need to care about. And that will take time. Not doing it poses risks for any campaign. The risk is that we are seen as competing for political attention, and we are seen as diverting the political decision-making apparatus away from another issue linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, linked to UHC, linked to HIV, AIDS, and malaria, TB, and malaria. We don't want to be seen as that, so we need to persuade them by creating these chains of equivalence. We need to build alliances with them and increase, or do we need to increase their influence with allies with low influence? Now you find that affected parties usually have low influence, so mothers in communities that are affected by Zika, for example, or people that have survived Ebola and worked on the front line. How do we give them a voice and increase their influence? Or the people working on disease surveillance in East Africa, for example, or West Africa. How do we give them a voice, make them champions, and increase their influence? That's critical. Doing campaigning isn't about us saying that a certain amount of things to decision makers. It's not even about us doing something. It's us ensuring things are done. Us working with the most influential people to try and get them to talk to the decision makers and get things changed. And then we need to be very cognizant of the fact that if a situation hasn't changed, it means either there's a low level of awareness. On GHSA, I don't think we're there, all this fragmentation we're not getting through, all these people on the different, all these people, influential voices that don't agree with this and are working against it very effectively. Think of the tobacco campaign in light of all the facts. There were powerful sections. We didn't see them publicly, but working very strongly and very effectively behind the scenes to block any legislation. Climate change campaigners are no doubt faced with a massive, powerful set of campaigners, lobbyists behind the scenes, putting alternative voices and positions to decision makers and delay in any rational decision making. We should anticipate that taking place on global health security and that agenda. We need to understand that. We need to understand their narrative, the evidence they're using, and integrate that within our narrative to undermine it and then move forward. Now, so that concludes the first part of my talk. That was very much based on the technique. It was a very quick, and I do apologize, move through the technical art of advocacy campaigning and the process involved and some of the questions and the way we think about it. I want to now talk about the global health security and how, for the campaign, certainly we kind of approached it and looked at it as an issue. And I think it's important to situate the global health security within its own historical context. And this is a fascinating story that starts, in fact, it starts long before this. The history of epidemics, it's spread across borders, and the desire of states to collaborate to stop that spread and to joining research goes back at least 150 years. But I picked this arbitrary date of 1829, which saw the start of the second cholera epidemics in Europe in the 19th century. And cholera, I don't need to tell you, obviously, it claimed millions of lives. It was a horrific, it still is, disease. And it, more importantly, for the powers that be at the time, the European powers, it had an adverse effect on trade, commerce in particular. So, the European powers decided in 1951 to develop an international sanitary conference. And it was kind of funny, where if you look at the trajectory of this, I'm not going to talk through all of it, but massive disease outbreaks happen. Then governments come together and decide something urgent needs to happen and come up with some convention, a set of regulations. And that has been happening since 1951, over 150 years that we've been coming together, recognizing the risk of infectious diseases, promising to do something. Now we have moved forward, clearly, but I want to draw your attention to 1907, when the Office International d'Hygiène Publique was created in Paris, and 1922, when the League of Nations Committee on Health section was created. And there was an attempt to merge the Office International d'Hygiène Publique into the League of Nations Health Committee, but that was opposed by the US. So two structures to deal with global health and the threat of epidemics and spread developed, one based in Paris and one based in Geneva. If you think of what's happening now with the way the WHO regional office in Africa has been set up and CDC Africa is set up, you can see that the move to create dual systems is still with us. We haven't quite cracked an integrated system, and I think that goes not only for that particular system in funding, the fragmentation of different, the way we approach funding is something that has a historical legacy that goes back over a century, and it's something that we should be aware of, because we have an opportunity in bringing this to awareness to try and change that. It will take political courage, but we're sitting here in a nation that gave itself the challenge to land a man on the moon in 10 years. and achieve that dream. So anything is possible. So the framework we're working with now is the revised IHR, and the campaign, we'll go into that a bit later, is very much based on trying to, to get that not adopted, because it's a legal thing, so abided by. What I will say, that the history of this this issue has always focused on particular disease threats. I think where we're coming to now is at a situation of increased globalization, increased proximity and interaction between the animal world and the human world, which means we are not able to identify the threats as they did in the past and identify 6 killer diseases and start to monitor those. We need to strengthen the system's capacity to identify risk as risk and respond without imagining we know what that risk will be in the future. Who knew that Ebola would break out in West Africa? It was a disease that was a threat to Central Africa. Who knew that Zika would break out in Latin America? Who knew SARS and MERS would break out when they did and spread to where they did, Korea of all places? We are not in a position to identify specific diseases and be vigilant against them. Therefore, we need to ensure that our systems are in place to be able to prevent, detect, and respond to epidemic threats. Now, these systems are weakest in the poorest countries. So global health security and international development are natural bedfellows. We need to work in tandem together. We need to work with the sustainable development community, and we can only build up these systems. Global health security will only be guaranteed when people's access to health is guaranteed everywhere, and the universal health coverage is one of the goals for the global health security agenda. And this effort, GHSA, needs to contribute and be part of that, but with a specific focus on the infectious diseases of epidemic potential and the need to build up the system's capacities and capabilities for that. So the political context we find ourselves in is one that shouldn't surprise us. Despite SARS, which led to the review of the IHR, despite H5N1, despite H1N1, despite Ebola, despite Zika, despite the yellow fever outbreaks and the other different outbreaks in different parts of the world, cholera in Africa a few years ago, we are still in the same situation that we were 100 years ago. But knowing that that is there and that there is a tendency to respond after epidemic outbreaks, specific disease outbreaks, and then abandon this, we need to move out of the community of the converted and appeal to a far greater audience, a far broader audience. And this is what campaign can offer the global health security agenda. The campaign is needed at this stage, or campaigning is needed at this stage, to reach in to the minds of people in their communities everywhere and translate what we know technically into the everyday concerns of people in their homes and communities everywhere, so that that percolates through to a political community that will no longer be able to ignore it, because not only is the risk too big, but the levels of concern are too high. And that means a deliberate effort to maintain the drum beating, if you like, between epidemics, and to continue to make the case to tap into that public consciousness. Okay, so this brings us to the No More Epidemics campaign, which is the third part of my presentation. And I wanted to introduce you to this initiative. The mission of the campaign is a 5-year campaign that brings together partners from the business community, academia, civil society, to work with governments and to influence governments, multilateral institutions, and others to prevent, prepare for, and minimize the impacts of future epidemics. The aim of the campaign is to mobilize civil society and the private sector. We want to work with technical experts, but technical experts are not our prime audience. You already know what the risks are. You already know what needs doing. We don't need to convince you. We just need to support you, to give you a voice among different audiences, to translate the great work that you're doing into a sort of digestible format for an everyday audience, and to develop a powerful narrative based on the caveats and the analysis that we outlined earlier, in order to be able to influence decision makers. Now, our objectives are broad, but a campaign shifting the political dial rather than focusing on specific technical interventions needs to be. We want to ensure the development of national preparedness plans that include community protection and mitigation. Communities are frequently seen as geographical locations and sites of intervention rather than the front line in the fight against epidemic diseases of epidemic potential. They are part of the health system, and they need to be considered as such and integrated, and rather than sort of marginalized, and we can go into that later on. We need no advocacy, and when we started the campaign, we were very surprised about that. Of all the international frameworks and the sort of treaties, duty obligations, kind of legally binding documents, international documents, no campaigning outfit owns or holds or champions the IHR. That was astounding, given the history of this particular piece of this particular framework. So the campaign, we set ourselves, we want to champion this. We are the ones who bang the drums and who want to sort of ensure that this becomes socialized, owned, and move this forward. Sorry, I've moved the wrong thing forward. I was reading a different screen. And then we want to increase international and national funding. Now, we don't want to increase and domestic funding. Now, we want to increase the funding to build up the system's capabilities and capacity to prevent, detect, and respond to epidemics. We don't want funding for the campaign, although we need funding for the campaign necessarily. But our call for funding is for donor funding and domestic resource mobilization to ensure long-term sustainable interventions and compliance with the international health regulations within the context of health system strengthening, because this cannot happen as another vertical approach. That would just not be sustainable in the long term. We need to take a step back and look at what will be a sustainable intervention, and we need to recognize the context and the need to build up these systems so that they become sustainable over the long run. We've got a set of positions that we review and update all the time. I won't go into that in any detail. I want to talk to you a little bit about the campaign's sort of how our structure. We're very flattered and honoured to have had a lot of support for the campaign over the last year. The campaign launched in November 2015 in South Africa, and we've established a structure that includes a steering committee that's made up of Management Sciences for Health, the African Field Epidemiology Network, International Medical Corps, and Save the Children. We've got an international advisory committee that's been very useful and that will be increasingly active as you know, we engage far more aggressively over the next 3 years. The campaign, we don't aim to be here forever. We are setting ourselves a task to achieve our objectives, or at least a large part of our objectives, by 2020, by which time we hope that other organizations will take this on, will champion this, and that no one organization needs to sort of, you know, promote the international health regulations, these will be recognized and integrated into everybody's work. We've got some great program partners, and we would encourage anybody who wants to become a program partner with the campaign to join us. Our program partners have a global footprint in over 102 countries, and we work with our different offices to engage different decision-making processes, whether it be the G20 in Germany, or engaging with decision makers in Uganda, Sierra Leone, Peru, or other countries, to try and take this discussion forward. The campaign timeline is to 2020, and we have a process that involves initial build-up, setting up the campaign, early campaign build-up and outreach, consolidating the campaign and broad appeal in year 3. Year 4, we want to achieve some of our campaigning objectives, certainly in a number of countries, and then we want a sustainable transition to different partner organizations for them to take this on board. Now, we need to take into account that our year 3 for us as a community is going to be very important. Next year is the centenary of the 1918 flu pandemic, and this offers another opportunity to focus minds on what could potentially happen. Are we any more prepared today than we were in 2018? What would happen now if something of that proportion were to hit and to develop? We need to be prepared not only against this risk, but against other types of risk that have that potential. So we want to take that discussion there. Okay, I think I'll leave it there for now. I just want to thank you all for your patience, and I would welcome any questions. Sorry if it was a little fast. I'd be more than happy, and if anybody wants to contact me in the next week or so with further questions, comments, or recommendations on how we can be more effective, please do. My contacts are on the website.
Frank, you mentioned, gave some examples of some advocacy where you've got pro and cons, you've got opposing forces, use tobacco and climate change as 2 examples. What kind of forces do you see out there who are opposed to the global health security agenda?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think what we're facing is a situation where there isn't kind of, well, let's be honest here. I think a number of people within different sectors see global health security, or have seen. I think that perception is changing as rich countries protecting themselves against diseases and shoring up their borders, and somehow the global health security agenda being sort of opposed to, or in direct juxtaposition to, the right to health, which is a universal narrative, which is quite ironic because the global health security agenda is a universal narrative by the sheer fact that we're all exposed to disease threats. You know, Ebola in West Africa, Ebola in Dallas, Ebola in Edinburgh. But when you come up with a new issue, you're always squeezing others for space and attention, and I think that you know, and potentially seen as compromising the good work and the progress being made on an issue. So I think that perception that GHSA stood in opposition or could somehow undermine the right to health was there until recently. I think we're moving beyond that now. Again, single diseases that are making great progress on particular issues, and that think, okay, if funding is going to increase for that, then funding is going to decrease for my issue. So I don't want to sort of back this at all. We need to be cognizant of that. And then so those are two sort of potential obstacles, or potential sort of voices of that would want to reduce or marginalize this particular issue as examples. I think we're moving through that, and that's why it's important to create these chains of equivalence and work in partnership.
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions on the YouTube. So the first question is, do you have any insight into how advocacy and campaigning can be best linked to evolving technical and programmatic focal areas, and how important are communication practices in this context?
I think it's critical for advocacy to be linked to communicate to technical areas. I think we advocates work best when we've got the backing of our technical colleagues. We speak on their behalf, and we want them to achieve the greatest success. Now, technical colleagues will focus very much on the detail, and everything will be more complicated than that, in inverted commas. And there's a tendency to focus on the trees or the particular technical area and not on others. So prioritize, 2 or 3 things, because we won't get it all. The role of the technical folk is to do that. The role of advocacy is to ask for everything, and to broaden that, because in doing that, we're satisfying a different strategic imperative, and that's to ensure that we're not bumping out others away. We're ensuring relevance. We're ensuring the issue remains on the agenda. And then when it comes to specific things in context, we will ask for a broad envelope of funding. But we need to work with our technical colleagues to say, okay, if we were to start somewhere, where would we start and why? Because everybody will say this, this, and this, and how much will it cost? So if we can make that case, we can develop a powerful narrative that will not challenge anybody else in the field, that will provide a great rationale for moving in this direction, and that will also complement the efforts of others. Now, when it comes to communicating, we need to ask, communicating what, to who, and why. And with technical communication, there's a tendency to say, this is what I did, or there's different formats. There's the technical communication to say, I need to justify myself to my donor, therefore I need to put something out that says, we did this, it was great, we're great, continue to support us. That's very ineffective from an advocacy point of view. That's self-congratulatory, necessary because the donor requires it, but from an influencing perspective, never useful, but necessary in certain contexts. What we need to do is we need to tell a story. We need a powerful, compelling narrative. That story should have and every man or every individual character, a goodie, a baddie, a sense of hope, a problem, a solution. It needs to move forward, and we need to sort of have signposts on the way. And the narrative of the campaign provides that. The technical expertise feeds into that, and at different moments to different audiences, we will tell that particular technical story. But we need to know that, and we need to work with our technical people to do that more effectively.
Awesome, thank you. So another question is on the issue of life cycle. How can one assess or measure an issue to know where it is through the cycle? Do you have examples of how an issue may have been assessed using this cycle as a tool?
You use it in every campaign planning that you do. I mean, I always use it. Now, what you do is you rely on the technical experts to say, to get the pulse from them. How are you doing? How much? First of all, you need to answer a few questions. How much is this raised in Parliament or in Congress? How much funding is there? What's the policy environment and the policy framework? Where are we in relation to IHR compliance here? Who's talking about this and who owns the issue? If all those discussions are still in the Ministry of Health, then the issue hasn't really progressed on the political agenda nationally. But you need to sit down. There isn't a science. You need to go through the process of analysis that will be different in different contexts and situations. For example, if we were to sit down in Liberia, looking at the media, what types of stories, how are they being told? Is it scandalous stories about specific diseases? Oh, now it's Ebola. Oh, now it's Zika. Or is the press more primed and more sophisticated in the way it understands this? Where is civil society on this? How many civil society organizations are working on this and championing that? So sitting down in the room or going through a set of stakeholder interviews will allow you to distill that information and come up with the results that will now allow you to situate that issue within the cycle.
Awesome. Okay, another question. 2 approaches for advocacy for the GHSA during times of transition. The first is to keep your head down and wait until dust settles, or 2, keep GHSA highlighted and prominent for new leaders. Any thoughts on the best way to keep global health security prioritized in this uncertain context?
That's a very good question. So I would not, you can't take your foot off the pedal. We need to, so the political class or the people from Trump's administration that are going to come in are targets, but we need to be talking to all those people who supported them. You know, the people who voted for Trump and his administration, because the people that voted for the Congress, the people in Congress. Let's take this out of Washington, as we're speaking about the Washington and the US context. And in times of political transition, you take this away from the Capitol and you go back to the grassroots. You make it relevant to the media in different kind of areas. You reach out to the local media, you reach out to local civil society. You get them to realize what this is, why it's important to them, what impact they can do. And make. I mean, there's some fantastic organizations, faith-based organizations, mass-based organizations, labor organizations, chambers of commerce. We need to be talking to them at the moment and making this issue relevant to them, so that when the dust has settled, the message is coming from them, not just from us. It's a very weak campaign if we have to do all the work. Influencing means us getting others to own the issue, champion it, and then let them come to the politicians, so that when we come with the technical, we want to come, and the technical people want to come with solutions. We need others to own the problem. We, the technical people, own the solutions. Let them invite you in. The campaigners can create that space.
Continuing that idea, I'm thinking of the news article from yesterday about the proposed group to address vaccinations, the effectiveness of vaccinations. When you have such a growing group of constituents, as you say, who should be the target of this information that is very scientifically based. If science isn't working with them, what heartstrings do you pull?
Okay, so the question was, the articles came out here in the US relating to the potential appointment of someone that is anti-vaccination. Well, that person is accountable to someone, presumably. Don't talk to that person. Talk to the people he in this case is accountable to, and persuade them, and then get the message out to them. If someone is so intransigent and opposed to your views, lower the volume. Get them to undermine them, marginalize them, but don't talk to them, because it's going to be a conversation of people that speak different languages. We are not the right messengers for that message to a person that denies the impact of vaccination, because we are obviously the people who champion that. But who are the people that he, in this case, is listening to, is accountable to, what his community? Let's persuade them and let them make the case and get the message to them. I think we need to be sophisticated about influencing, and not assume that I want to influence this person, I need to go and talk to them, or I need to have a direct conversation with that person, either via the media or in other ways. We need to work through chains of influence in that sense.
I do have a quick question. So, as a takeaway from the conversation that we had yesterday at Georgetown University, there was a big sense of the need to have a public health emergency fund or a preparedness fund or whatever the case may be. And as you're talking about advocacy and really advocating to the general population, it seems that the general population only catches on to public health or the need for public health when there is Ebola, or they don't understand the sense of globalization. So a disease threat anywhere is a disease threat everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So as you're starting to think about advocating for this public health emergency fund, what do you tell the people? What is the initial message that you say to encourage them that, you know, that central message that any disease can show up here at any point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's continuing to make that message. I mean, at the moment, we're sending messages out via the media and hoping they stick. We need to actually get out there and talk to people. You know, we need to talk to mass-based organizations, to, you know, faith-based leaders, to, you know, all these different constituencies, and get them to champion this. So rather than just talking to ourselves. Now, in terms of this, a new idea, like, or, you know, an idea like this fund is a great idea, but the technical community needs to come together and work out the potential, what it looks like, how it's going to operate, how it sits next to other funds, the World Bank's fund, how it sits, you know, World Bank IDA funding, you know, who administers it, who's accountable for it, what is the right contributions. All these technical things need to be worked out before we suggest the idea, because if we suggest another idea like, oh, give us money and give us you know, funding for this, then nothing really will happen, because it's just another call for money. We need to sort of we need to work out the technical, and also we'll be seen as competing with the Global Fund, Gavi, with you know, the World Bank's emergency pandemic. What is it? Emergency Pandemic Fund, Preparedness Fund, and so we need to sit down, if we are serious about that idea, and work out exactly what we mean by this, how it would be administered, and all of that. So that's on one side, on the technical side. While the policy people and the technical people do that, the advocates need to go out and start to make the case. Once that case is made, once the narrative is made, we can approach the decision makers and say, this is the fund that's needed, and this is what we need to top it up with. But let's not start with the US government. Let's start with others. Korea's taking over the chairmanship of the GHSA. Let's see what they've got to say about it. Let's see what Indonesia and Finland can contribute. Let's try and get China to step up some money. I mean, you know, that will be a really good way of influencing the US. The other thing is, let's convince the G20 and the G7 to support this initiative. Before that, we need to work out the details of it. But you know, I think it's important, a declaration or a summit statement by the G7 and then the G20 will tie the administration more closely into this issue. And that's why it's very important for us to engage in these multilateral or global events and fora, so that the US can be pressured by its peers as well. And this is where the campaign is working very closely with its partners in civil society in those different countries.
If there are any other questions from online, if you could add them to the chat box.
I mean, anybody can, please feel free to contact me. This is an issue we're all passionate about on the More Epidemics team. So, you know, we'd be more than happy. You wouldn't be bothering us in the least if you just picked up the phone or sent us an email. We're here, you know, for that. So if anything else, please don't hesitate.
All right, well, seeing no more questions, we're going to close out the webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. And as Frank said, if you have any questions, please feel free to email him. Today's presentation will be available later today. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. How'd that go? Sorry, it was a bit fast. I had to know to get through it. Did that make sense? Would you tell me if it didn't?